This is The World This Weekend. Hello, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Hundreds of Israelis and Palestinians are dead after the militant group Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel.
Citizens of Israel, we are at war.
Israel has responded with a massive counteroffensive. We'll bring you all the latest news and analysis on that story. Also coming up, the growing push to end virtual citizenship ceremonies in Canada.
The worthwhile things in person should never be replaced by anything online.
That's later, but first. It started with a barrage of rocket fire, then a surprise incursion of Hamas militants from Gaza into Israel. Armed fighters attacked multiple locations. Hundreds of Israelis are dead and hundreds of Palestinians killed by Israel's retaliation. Sasha Petrusik tells us how it unfolded.
The early morning rocket attacks were surprising enough. A barrage of thousands fired out of Gaza, hitting cities as far as Jerusalem, starting fires and killing dozens in Israel. But what came next stunned a country used to being on alert. An attack far more sophisticated than anything the militant group Hamas has ever launched. Drones dropping grenades, attacks from the sea, and squads of heavily armed militants crossing the fortified border around Gaza. They attacked Israeli army bases, dragging the body of a soldier from a burning tank. Others roamed the streets of Israel itself, killing civilians. In Sderot, they were shot in their cars. It's a sea of bodies, says this man. It's tragic. Other Israelis and even soldiers were captured, dragged back to Gaza as hostages. Israel has confirmed it. We are at war, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says. We will return fire of a magnitude the enemy has not known. He mobilized the country's many reserves. In Gaza, as captured Israeli army vehicles were paraded, the attack was initially met with a celebration. The Israelis have tormented us enough, says a woman named Naja. Now it's their turn. Hamas says recent Israeli crackdowns against Palestinians in the West Bank provoked this attack. Retaliation by Israel quickly followed, sending Palestinians fleeing to safety. We are afraid they might wipe us off the face of the earth, says this woman. Of course we are scared. The airstrikes by Israel targeted militants, it said, destroying office towers in Gaza. And in response, more rockets from Hamas were launched into Tel Aviv, many salvos in a renewed conflict that is still building. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Toronto.
And to dig deeper into that conflict, we spoke to Peter Armstrong. He was the CBC's correspondent in Jerusalem for several years. He joined me earlier. Peter, Israel has an incredibly sophisticated surveillance and intelligence system, but today's attacks came as a surprise. So how did that happen?
This is a nearly, if not entirely unprecedented, catastrophic failure of intelligence, and it wasn't a single point of failure. It's not like one thing went wrong. A whole series of things went wrong. Anybody who spent any time in and around Gaza and southern Israel, there are like balloons overhead, there's a blimp flying, there's drones everywhere. You can really sense and feel in everything you do, the level of surveillance is unlike anything anybody in North America would have experienced before. And yet, somehow in this, they were able to plan, train, and carry out one of the most sophisticated and now longest standing, like the fact that this went on for hours upon hours, that they were able to sort of plan, carry out, and do this attack right under Israel's nose is something that somebody down the road, obviously not today, is going to have to answer for. And it really does speak to the level of sophistication, the level of planning that went into this, which also means the reason that matters is because it was very well funded to be able to pull this off in the way that they did.
It seems like it represents a change in tactic by Hamas, a new level of sophistication and planning. What do you think that signifies? What does that mean?
Well, it is an interesting development within this, to be sure. And the fact that Hamas has been able to do this, usually when you see these kinds of attacks, it's somebody tunnels underneath the border fence, pops up, attacks a convoy, shoots a couple of soldiers, and then scurries back into Israel. Even at the height of both intifadas, the time of an engagement would be incredibly short, would be minutes, not hours, and certainly not a day-long attack. So it is certainly a shift. It is a shift in Hamas tactics. And also, one of the very first attacks that we saw was a drone attack over an Israeli tank where a drone flew in and just dropped a grenade right in on top of this tank and took it out. That's an adaptation of what we've been seeing happening in Ukraine, for example. So there's a lot at play on that alone.
Huh. And why now? Why is this the moment?
Well, I think a lot of people through the day have been saying that Israel was distracted. A lot of the focus, a lot of the attention, and frankly, a lot of the fighting that's been going on in this conflict has been taking place in the West Bank and in and around Jerusalem. There was a big standoff up in Jenin. There have been a lot of skirmishes on the Al-Aqsa compound in Jerusalem, and a lot of the focus has been there. There's been some question about exactly how much of the Israeli deployable battalions were actually in the West Bank rather than in the South. That doesn't mean that Gaza was left unguarded. There's obviously border patrols, there's police, there's all of that. But of the fighting units that would respond to an attack like this, how many of them were up in the West Bank rather than in the South where somebody didn't see this coming is a big question.
You spent years in this region as the CBC News Jerusalem correspondent. Can you put some of the violence that we've seen today into the broader context for us?
It's actually hard to, because the level to which this is unprecedented, the word unprecedented almost doesn't cover it. Like I say, these kinds of attacks just have never happened. 1973 was the last time you saw a sustained attack of somebody coming in and attacking Israel on Israeli soil. The other thing to remember here, Stephanie, is, the stuff people are seeing on TV is not the extent of it. There are videos and images that we cannot confirm because they've been released by Hamas, that we cannot confirm because they've been released by individuals who we don't know. And then even if we could confirm them, I'm not sure we'd put them on television. They're so gruesome. So the appalling violence that we have seen through the course of this day is unprecedented as well. The fact that this is not just, soldiers or whatever, which is bad enough, but, Israeli citizens, civilians that were sitting in a bus stop or sitting in a cafe or driving through town, attacked and killed and left dead on the street. It really has been a shocking thing to watch unfold.
Wow. And what now? What will you be watching for in the days ahead? Well,
the main thing is you have to get the fighting that's still going on to stop. But beyond that, the big concern is that this expands, that, Hezbollah in the north reportedly has something like 150,000 rockets hidden in the south of Lebanon, ready to fire on southern Israel, that militants in the West Bank, that they could expand the operation from what started with Hamas in Gaza. And I think that's what most people today are desperately hoping will not happen. But that's the thing I'll be watching for.
Okay, thanks so much, Peter.
You bet.
The CBC's Peter Armstrong in Toronto. Now, reaction to the violence is pouring in from around the world. Officials are closely monitoring the escalating situation, as are Jewish and Palestinian communities. Since this morning, most Western countries, including Canada and the U.S., have condemned the attacks. Philip Lee Shannock brings us that part of the story.
Video from southern Israeli settlements show bodies at bus stops covered with blankets. Motorists slumped in their bullet-ridden cars.
The world's seen appalling images.
U.S. President Joe Biden condemned the attacks as unconscionable.
Hamas terrorists crossing in Israel, killing not only Israeli soldiers, but Israeli civilians. In the street, in their homes, innocent people murdered, wounded, entire families taken hostage.
And he says it came on one of the holiest days in the Jewish calendar. Ido Moed is Israel's ambassador designate to Canada.
We could just imagine what would happen on Thanksgiving Day here in Canada, in Toronto, Montreal. if all of a sudden, 7 o'clock in the morning, everybody had to run to shelters for their lives.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau pledged Canada's support for Israel, posting on X that these acts of violence are completely unacceptable. Our thoughts are with everyone affected by this. Civilian life must be protected. There have been similar words from Western European leaders today. France, Britain, and Germany all have expressed solidarity with Israel, which they maintain has every right to defend itself.
Well, it's frankly not surprising at all. Of course, the United States and Canada and other allies of Israel are deeply invested.
Yusuf Mener is head of the Palestine-Israel program at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. He says this is just the latest in the cycle of violence.
This is not the first episode we've seen of this, and it surely will not be the last if the only answer we have is continued support and enablement of human rights violations and international law violations against Palestinians.
Mira Sukharov teaches political science at Carleton University in Ottawa. She says she's heard from friends and family in southern Israeli communities who are in harm's way. And she says recently the world has been watching unprecedented, widespread, and sustained protests in Israel against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. She expects that will change.
Netanyahu is going to be able to divert attention from all those domestic woes and be able to position himself as the great savior and the great retaliator for this brazen attack by Hamas. At the same time, he will have to answer serious questions about what led to this intelligence failure.
Meanwhile, Turkey called on Israelis and Palestinians to act with restraint, as did the United Arab Emirates and Egypt, while Saudi Arabia has called for an immediate ceasefire. The United Nations has also called for an end to hostilities in the region. The Security Council will hold an emergency meeting tomorrow. Philip Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
And we have more on the reaction to the violence from the countries neighboring Israel and Gaza. Here is NPR's Gulf Bureau Chief Aya Batrawi in Dubai speaking to CBC's Nisha Patel earlier today.
One kind of unifying thread through all the regional reactions from countries like Egypt, which border Gaza and have mediated in past wars between Gaza and Israel, countries like Jordan, countries like Saudi Arabia, which are in serious talks now with Washington to formalize ties with Israel, countries like Qatar and others, is that this was almost inevitable. They have been warning for months now of a, quote, explosive situation. That is the statement from Saudi Arabia. Qatar even goes as far as saying that it holds Israel responsible for the current escalation. And the reason is because, this didn't come out of nowhere. As much as it was a stunning surprise for everyone in this region, no one expected this today. There have been so many raids in the West Bank over the past several months. There have been, this extreme right-wing, hardline Israeli government taking much bolder security measures in the West Bank that have killed hundreds of Palestinians this year. I think over 250 or nearly 250 Palestinians killed this year by Israeli forces. So this didn't come out of a vacuum, and I think the region here has been watching this slowly escalating, and countries like the United Arab Emirates, which have really close security ties and trade ties with Israel after formalizing ties in 2020, have also had to come out and sort of do this balancing act where they have in past situations had to really call on Israel and say, publicly at least, we really do condemn some of these strolls by dozens of settlers or more through the sensitive Al-Aqsa compound, which is, the holy site in Jerusalem that's very holy to Muslims and to Jews. They've also, we've seen raids in Ramadan on Al-Aqsa Mosque of people praying and worshiping during one of the most holy months for Muslims. So this didn't come out of nowhere. And of course, you have the Lebanon's Hezbollah group, which is backed by Iran, coming out and congratulating the Palestinian factions for this, and even saying this is a warning to countries in the Middle East that are thinking of formalizing ties with Israel, that the Palestinian cause is still really alive.
That's NPR's Gulf Bureau Chief Aya Batrawi in Dubai. To other news now. And Environment Canada is warning people in the Maritimes of wet and windy weather tonight. Special weather statements are in effect for New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island. Several areas could see at least 50 millimeters of rain from a weakening post-tropical storm Philippe. Forecasters expect winds to be weaker than last month's post-tropical storm Lee, so any new damage will likely be limited to broken tree branches with the occasional power outage. RCMP in Saskatchewan are setting up a temporary detachment in the southwestern village of Richmond in response to the presence of a group that calls themselves the Kingdom of Canada. Police say the detachment will be staffed around the clock and officers will be doing regular patrols. The mayor of the village recently said he had contacted the Mounties and the province for help because residents are feeling threatened by the self-proclaimed Queen of Canada, Romana Didulo, and her followers. Brad Miller says fake cease and desist letters were sent to village officials warning about trials for crimes against humanity and containing threats of public executions. Okay, well, automation and artificial intelligence have the potential to reshape entire industries. Companies in the meat processing sector see potential benefits. But as Kyle Bax explains, the technology still has many limitations.
Cutting, trimming, and deboning. Meat processing is one of the most labor-intensive industries. Those in the business say technology, including artificial intelligence, could transform meatpacking facilities. But the sector is also one of the most difficult to modernize.
I would definitely say that we're laggards in many ways.
Andrea Liris is the Chief Information and Technology Officer at Maple Leaf Foods.
We're making small investments, but definitely behind the curve compared to some other sectors.
The manufacturing sector, including automotive plants, has relied on robotics for some time. But putting a bolt in a car is very different than working with meat, since no two animals are the same. So far, robotic equipment is not able to make precise cuts, and specifically with poultry, it can struggle to accurately tell the difference between skin, fat, bone, and meat.
So I'd say super difficult. Getting better, though. Robots are becoming more tactile.
Any equipment also has to be tough enough to operate in cool temperatures and withstand high-pressure spraying as part of a facility's routine sanitation. That was a big challenge for Olga Pavlochuk, chief executive of P&P Optica. She helped design an AI imaging tool to understand food chemistry as the meat moves along the production line and detect contaminants.
You have to clean it in such a way that you don't have salmonella, listeria, E. coli growing in the plant. So you're using hot water with soap with high pressure, then you're rinsing it. It's not a gentle environment, let me put it that way.
The meat processing sector could benefit from more innovation, experts say, to overcome labor shortages or at least assist workers. Food economist Mike Von Masso from the University of Guelph.
I'm not aware of anywhere where there are companies that have really sort of cutting edge technology, pardon the pun, in a meatpacking plant. I think that the technology hasn't come far enough yet.
There's plenty at stake for the industry, especially with increasing competition from companies selling lab-grown meat and plant-based protein. That's why Van Masso says it's so important for meat packers to use more technology to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of their facilities. Kyle Bax, CBC News, Calgary.
Artificial intelligence is providing a window into Argentina's past. Nearly 40 years after the fall of the country's military dictatorship, Argentina is still fractured by the fate of thousands of people who went missing. That includes children, stolen from political dissidents and raised by other families. Decades on, one man is trying to give them a face, using AI to imagine what those children would look like today. Mandy Sham has that story.
It's a person who doesn't go anywhere, who isn't anywhere.
In other words, a shadow of a person, denied justice and the right to be remembered. 47-year-old Santiago Barros is talking about the desaparecidos, people who didn't just go missing, but were disappeared during the period known as Argentina's Dirty War.
We have a desaparecido in our family, so it's something that I grew up with.
That absence is felt across Argentina, a wound that has scarred nearly every household and refuses to heal.
Dos desaparecidos.
Tenemos 3 hijos desaparecidos.
Between the 70s and 80s, an estimated 30,000 people were kidnapped or killed. Hundreds of their children were stolen and raised in families linked to the dictatorship. When Barros came across the AI program called Midjourney, he realized he could merge images to generate faces of those children as they might look today.
I combine those pictures, mother and father, and create a new image.
The photos are published almost daily to an Instagram account called Ay Abuelas. It's a nod to decades-long efforts led by the abuelas, or grandmothers, of Plaza de Mayo.
Hemos tomado una decisión.
A group that has successfully identified nearly 140 stolen children. Barros says his project is about public awareness and aims to spark the conscience of anyone with doubts about their ancestry. At least 10 people have contacted him with hopes of generating images of their missing family members.
There's a great quote that technology is neither good nor bad, neither is it neutral. It does what we make it do. AI is no different.
Richard Lachman is an associate professor of digital media at Toronto Metropolitan University. He says AI programs like Midjourney aren't accurate, and they tend to reflect the biases of the society they're built in. That means, for example, the photos could skew toward European facial characteristics. Still, Lachman says projects like Ay Abuelas speak to the potential of AI.
This is something that is getting awareness, is getting us to pay attention. And that's not nothing. That is something that's incredibly important, to get people to remember.
It may be artistic in nature for now, but Barros wants to use Ay Abuelas to send a message to young people who have only ever known democracy.
We need to teach them what happened and to remember what happened.
He says it's an exercise in memory and justice for the thousands who are missing and dead, but he hopes never forgotten. Mandy Sham, CBC News, Toronto.
Google has rejected the latest draft of the Canadian government's Online News Act, and the tech giant has once again threatened to remove Canadian news links from its search engine over what the company considers serious flaws in the regulations. The act is meant to help the struggling news industry. It'll force digital giants to negotiate deals with news publishers to compensate them for work that is shared on their platforms. It doesn't come into force until December, but Meta started removing news from Facebook and Instagram this summer. An update now on a story we brought you this summer about refugees and asylum seekers with nowhere to go who found themselves sleeping on the streets of Toronto. The problem was that the city's shelters were full. The story caused an outcry across the country and prompted finger-pointing by all levels of government. In the meantime, several churches in the Greater Toronto area stepped in to help. Nick Purdon paid a visit to tell us about the situation today.
Hey guys, I need your help just to do a quick cleanup because this is a bedroom for everyone tonight.
Nadine Miller is a director with the Pilgrim Feast Tabernacles Church in Toronto.
The church has become a safe haven, a refugee camp that we never expected to be.
In recent months, Miller has helped more than 200 refugees here, and she says she's exhausted.
I don't have a life right now. This is my life right now. I eat, breathe, sleep, and barely sleep.
Miller drew on her experience running humanitarian missions overseas to create a refugee shelter in her church.
Normally we do this internationally, and it's mind-blowing to know that we have to do it in Canada.
As Miller serves lunch to a long lineup of people, another refugee shows up looking for a place to sleep.
Give us 1 second, please.
The man's name is Augustin. He was found sleeping on the street. Miller doesn't have a bed for him, but she doesn't want to turn him away.
We're full right now. Like, you're standing on somebody's bed.
Please, help him.
It's not that I want to say no. It's just that the city shelters overrun themselves. Just let them eat something and then we'll figure it out.
This summer, more refugees like Augustin arrived in Canada than all of 2021, many of them fleeing more than 35 armed conflicts going on right now in Africa. Augustin says he fled Nigeria because he got caught up in a violent separatist conflict.
I couldn't come out to the daylight. I was always indoor, scared of any sound I hear outside.
Augustin says that right now he's tired and he just needs a place to sleep.
I'm hoping that they will take me because I have no other place to go.
Miller phones around but isn't able to find Augustin a bed. Her church is full. She takes me to the basement where the men sleep. There are mattresses, one after the other, along both walls. There's no room for another bed.
When you come down here and you look around, what do you think about?
That this could be somebody's father, mother, my own. That they shouldn't really be here. That's what I think about. How do I get them home? How do I get them to turn their own key?
If you hadn't done this, turned your church into a shelter, where do you think these men would be?
It actually makes me sad to think that they would be out on the streets still, because there's no one to pick them up. When we as individuals say to someone, go back to your country, go back to what? Go back to a place where somebody will take your life?
Miller says she has no idea how much longer her church will be a shelter. And with winter coming, she worries the situation will get worse. Nick Purdon, CBC News, Toronto.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can listen to this program anytime on the CBC Listen app or on the CBC News YouTube channel. Some 1,500 Canadians are calling for an end to online citizenship ceremonies. The practice started during the pandemic lockdowns. Opponents say swearing the oath over Zoom cheapens what is supposed to be an important milestone for new Canadians. Rafi Boudjikanian reports.
Please repeat after me. Veuillez répéter après moi. I swear.
New Canadians celebrate as they're sworn in as citizens on Canada Day.
You did it! Congratulations, everyone!
The kind of pomp and circumstance Zimbabwe-born Kimberly Simon didn't have when she became a citizen in 2021. Simon was sworn in during a virtual ceremony over Zoom, but she says it still had plenty of heart.
I cried, actually. So it wasn't about us being in a room. We still got that connection. You saw all types of people, like from their homes, and that was phenomenal.
The federal government says the online option has only become more popular. More than 90% of new Canadians used it to take their citizenship oaths in the last half of 2022. But critics see swearing in on screen as a poor substitute for the real thing.
I really believe that helping people come to Canada and interact with Canada in the most ways possible helps them become better community members.
Former Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi is the son of immigrants himself. He says some of his most meaningful days in office involved presiding over citizenship ceremonies.
To have that citizenship judge or to have that Order of Canada recipient standing there reading the oath for you to be able to do the oath in community with others, it meant a lot to people.
He is not the only one opposed to the virtual option. More than 1,500 people have signed a petition to Parliament urging the government to pull the plug. They include former Governor General Adrienne Clarkson.
The worthwhile things in person should never be replaced by anything online.
Clarkson says over the years, foreign governments have told her they're envious of the Canadian tradition.
Citizenship is not just about administration. Citizenship is about exercising all your rights and privileges and also taking part in the social fabric of your country.
Mark Miller, the immigration minister himself, has his own preference.
Doing your citizenship ceremony in public in front of with your family and with people that are becoming new Canadians is a moment to remember in people's lives.
But he says there are other factors his department has to weigh as it decides whether it will hold on to the virtual oaths or do away with them.
We need options that are flexible, especially in rural regions, and we've certainly heard it from rural colleagues and from people that don't want to move 100 or 200 kilometers to do an in-person citizenship ceremony.
As for Kimberly Simon,
the world has changed. We're doing a lot of things online.
She says if she had a choice, she would still have hopped on the internet, though she admits there's one thing she missed out on.
My friends have pictures with their judges and stuff like that.
Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
One final recap of our top story: the surprise large-scale attack by the militant group Hamas into Israel this morning, killing more than 200 people, injuring hundreds more, and taking hostages. Israel has launched a counteroffensive and around 200 people are now dead in the Gaza Strip. For more on this story and any other breaking news anytime, you can always go to CBCNews.ca. This has been The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Thank you for listening.